In the opulent setting of the Villarreal mansion, life seemed idyllic and calm. Marcella, the dedicated housekeeper, attended to her duties with a keen eye, noticing subtle shifts in the household dynamics. Her days were filled with routine tasks, but a nagging feeling grew as she observed the increasingly frail condition of Mrs. Teresa, the elderly matriarch. Concerned by Javier, the eldest son, who displayed a disquieting demeanor, Marcella's suspicions led her to set up a hidden camera. What she uncovered through her discreet surveillance shocked her to the core. Behind the facade of luxury and tranquility, a dark secret was unraveling Javier's sinister actions against his mother. As Marcella watched the footage, the truth emerged with a chilling clarity, revealing a betrayal that could shatter the very foundation of the Villarreal family. Join us as we delve into this unsettling story, from the seemingly serene beginnings to the heart-wrenching discovery that exposes the true nature of those entrusted with the care of loved ones. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. In the opulent Villarreal mansion, a housekeeper began to notice a series of unsettling occurrences that sparked her deep concern. With a sense of unease and apprehension, she decided to install a hidden camera, hoping to uncover the source of the disquieting events. What she unearthed through the lens was nothing short of shocking and deeply unsettling. As the golden rays of the morning sun poured through the grandiose windows of the Villarreal residence, casting a warm glow over the plush furnishings and pristine marble floors, Marcella went about her duties with meticulous care. Dressed in her impeccably pressed uniform, she glided through the expansive hallways, methodically collecting discarded coffee cups and realigning skewed photographs. Her discerning gaze absorbed every nuance of the bustling household, missing nothing in her vigilant observation. Mrs. Teresa, the venerable matriarch of the Villarreal clan, slowly made her way down the majestic staircase, her fragile hand clinging to the polished handrail for support. Marcella swiftly moved to offer her assistance, her concern intensifying as she noted the alarming pallor and fatigue etched into the elderly woman's once vibrant face. "Thank you, my dear," Mrs. Teresa whispered with a weary smile, her voice tinged with gratitude and exhaustion. "I don't know what I would do without you." Before Marcella could muster a reply, Javier, the eldest son of the Villarreal family, strode into the foyer. His impeccably tailored suit and disarming smile stood in stark contrast to the icy, unfeeling coldness that emanated from his eyes. "Mom, what are you doing up so early? You should be resting." Javier's voice conveyed a veneer of concern that felt disingenuous to Marcella. "I'm perfectly fine, son," Mrs. Teresa responded, though her voice quivered with uncertainty. Marcella observed, her heart sinking, as Javier guided his mother towards the dining room, his hands gripping her frail shoulders with an unsettling firmness. Something was disconcerting in his demeanor, a latent tension that sent an icy shiver racing down Marcella's spine. As she busied herself preparing breakfast, she overheard snatches of conversation laden with words like inheritance, notary, and alterations, each term imbued with a heavy, foreboding significance that she could not ignore. While pouring tea, Marcella couldn't help but notice the intense scrutiny with which Javier regarded his mother as she sipped her tea, his eyes betraying an unsettling fixation. The atmosphere in the room felt thick with unspoken implications, and Marcella's unease grew, sensing that the seemingly mundane interactions masked a deeper, more troubling undercurrent. Javier's intense stare locked onto Marcella as he issued his commanding order. "Ensure my mother takes all her medications," he instructed with an imperious tone. "No more unexpected visits. She's in a fragile state." That evening, as Marcella served dinner, she felt a chill as she observed Javier's hawk-like scrutiny over every morsel his mother consumed. The creeping suspicion that had troubled her for days solidified into a profound dread that clutched at her heart. When Mrs. Teresa retreated to her bedroom, Marcella assisted her with her nightgown, and the elderly woman's whispered words, fraught with fear, pierced Marcella's soul. "I'm frightened. Something is wrong. With a tender squeeze of Mrs. Teresa's trembling hand, Marcella's mind whirled with urgency. She knew action was imperative, but the exact course of action eluded her. A quiet resolve formed in the darkness. She needed to gather concrete evidence. Her heart pounded with anticipation as she discreetly nestled the tiny camera into a vase in the mansion's grand room. Her fingers shook with a mix of trepidation and resolve, but her determination to uncover the truth remained unwavering. This was her only chance to validate the sinister suspicions that plagued her thoughts. Suddenly, Javier's voice sliced through the tension, startling Marcella and almost causing her to drop the vase. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "Just tidying up, sir," Marcella replied, striving to keep her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Javier's penetrating gaze seemed to bore into her very soul, and for a moment, the world stood still. After an excruciatingly long pause, he finally said, "Be cautious. These vases are priceless." As he departed, Marcella exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her pulse racing with a mix of adrenaline and escalating anxiety. What peril was she stepping into? Returning to her modest apartment that night, Marcella was greeted by Roberto's concerned and agitated face. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice taut with frustration. "I've been waiting for hours. What's the delay?" "Roberto, Marcella replied, her exhaustion evident. "Working late? How many hours do you spend at that mansion?" he pressed, jealousy seeping into his words. Marcella was overwhelmed with the urge to confide in him, to unburden her soul and share the growing terror she felt. Marcella's pulse quickened as she crossed paths with Javier in the hallway. His gaze was so piercing it seemed to freeze her very blood. "Marcella," he said, his voice deceptively gentle, yet carrying an edge that sent shivers down her spine. "Everything all right?" "Yes, sir," she managed to reply, her voice quavering as she fought to maintain her composure. "Just organizing the cleaning supplies." Javier's eyes, sharp and unyielding, remained fixed on her as he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Remember," he added with an almost imperceptible smile, "discretion is paramount in this household." To Marcella, those words felt like a chilling threat, veiled beneath a veneer of politeness. She nodded stiffly and walked away, acutely aware of his gaze boring into her back. That night, in the solitude of her small apartment, Marcella sat with a heavy heart as she replayed the footage she had collected. The grim reality of what she had witnessed left her reeling with horror. The weight of the situation was unbearable. What course of action could she take? Confront Javier and risk her safety? Alert the authorities and potentially face retaliation? Confide in Mrs. Teresa, who was already frail and vulnerable? Each option seemed fraught with peril, and Marcella felt ensnared in a labyrinth of deception and danger, with Mrs. Teresa's well-being hanging in the balance. The oppressive burden of this knowledge bore down on her, extinguishing any semblance of peace or rest. The night stretched on, fraught with anxiety and dread, as Marcella resolved that she could no longer remain passive. She had to act, no matter the personal risk involved. The arrival of Carlos, the youngest Villarreal's son, was a jarring disruption to the already tense atmosphere of the mansion. Marcella observed him with a mixture of concern and disbelief as he stumbled through the door, his disheveled appearance and bloodshot eyes betraying the ongoing struggle with his addiction. "Carlos misses." Teresa's voice was a turbulent mix of relief and apprehension. "We didn't know you were coming." Javier appeared in the foyer, his expression a thinly veiled mask of disdain. "What a pleasant surprise, little brother. What brings you here?" His sarcasm was palpable, but Carlos brushed it off with a dismissive shrug. "Do I need a reason to visit my mother?" he retorted, enveloping Mrs. Teresa in a tight embrace. Marcella, ostensibly occupied with arranging books, couldn't help but notice how the old woman swayed slightly under the weight of the hug. The evident decline in her health was distressing. As dinner unfolded, The atmosphere crackled with tension, the underlying strains of family discord and unspoken fears palpable in every strained conversation. The atmosphere within the mansion became palpably charged with dread when Carlos, fueled by mounting suspicion, finally confronted Javier one fateful evening. "I've been sifting through the records," Javier, he declared, his voice resonating with both anger and desperation. "What's going on with Mom's healthy?" Javier's usually composed facade wavered momentarily, a flicker of unease crossing his features. "Carlos," he said with an air of dismissive nonchalance, "you're overreacting. Mother's decline is simply a natural part of aging." Carlos, however, remained unconvinced. His eyes bore into Javier's with a steely resolve as he responded, his tone low and unwavering. "I don't trust you. Something is deeply wrong here, and I'm going to uncover the truth." From her vantage point, Marcela watched with a mix of apprehension and hope. The confrontation had charged the atmosphere with an electric tension, signaling that the situation was nearing a critical juncture. Later that night, as Marcela lay in her modest apartment, a phone call shattered the silence. It was Carlos, his voice trembling with urgency and fear. "Marcela, I need your help. I believe Javier is plotting something dire." Marcela's heart pounded with alarm. She agreed to meet Carlos in a secluded spot away from the mansion, the ominous darkness of the night amplifying the sense of foreboding that cloaked their rendezvous. When Carlos arrived, his pallid face and wide, anxious eyes told a story of deep distress. "I've uncovered something disturbing," he said, thrusting a folder into Marcela's hands. "I suspect Javier's been concealing more than just medication tampering. You need to see this." Marcela opened the folder, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the documents outlining a sinister scheme to siphon off Mrs. Teresa's assets. "He's planning to kill her for the inheritance," Carlos said, his voice quivering with fear and resolve. "We have to stop him before it's too late." Marcela's resolve solidified as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. "We must act swiftly," she affirmed, her voice resolute. "I'll get this information to the authorities immediately." Carlos nodded in agreement, and they parted ways, driven by a shared urgency. Marcela understood that revealing Javier's plot was merely the first step in a perilous journey. The path ahead was fraught with risks and uncertainties, but the stakes were too high to ignore. As the brothers clashed violently on the cold floor, Dona Teresa, her voice frail yet resolute, intervened with a desperate plea. "Please stop this madness. My dear children, what have we become?" Her words, heavy with anguish and disillusionment, seemed to halt time itself. Carlos paused abruptly, his clenched fists suspended midair, as he stared in horror at Javier, who lay unmoving on the ground. The weight of the moment was palpable, reflected in the stunned realization etched in Carlos's eyes. The stillness was abruptly shattered by the distant wail of sirens, piercing through the thick silence. Aid was on its way, yet the irrevocable harm inflicted upon the Villarreal family was already a grim reality. Marcela, having returned to the scene, surveyed the aftermath with a heart full of mixed emotions, relief mingled with profound sorrow. The harsh truth had finally emerged, but the toll had been exorbitant. As the police vehicles drew nearer, a collective understanding settled over the group. The once familiar haven of the Villarreal mansion had been irrevocably transformed. The fading sirens' echoes seemed to seep away, leaving behind an oppressive silence that blanketed the estate in a mournful shroud. Javier was soon escorted away by the police, leaving behind a poignant trail of emotional wreckage. Dona Teresa, utterly spent by the day's harrowing events, retreated to her room under the vigilant care of an emergency physician. Marcela, still reeling from the adrenaline surge, found herself in the kitchen, her trembling hands clutching a steaming cup of tea. The sudden sound of footsteps jolted her from her reverie, causing her to spin around sharply. Roberto stood in the doorway, his expression a poignant blend of relief and deep concern. "Marcela," he whispered, inching closer with tentative steps. Roberto's voice cracked with emotion as tears brimmed in his eyes. "I saw the patrol cars," he said, drawing nearer with a mix of urgency and care. "I had to come. Are you all right? What on earth happened?" Marcella tried to respond, but her words were swallowed by a sob that racked her body. Roberto pulled her into a comforting embrace, his arms a refuge as she finally let the tears flow freely, finding solace in the warmth of his presence amidst the chaos. As Roberto departed to take the urgent call, Marcella found herself alone with Carlos, the room enveloped in a thick, oppressive silence filled with unsaid words and unresolved tensions. The night had dragged on, teeming with unsettling revelations and unspoken truths, but Marcella sensed that the darkness still held more secrets, more wounds that needed to be tended to within the walls of the Villarreal mansion. With dawn's arrival, a deceptive tranquility settled over the Villarreal estate. Laura, her eyes rimmed with dark circles from a restless, sleepless night, was deeply engrossed in her father's study. She sifted through stacks of papers and folders with a feverish urgency. "It has to be here," she whispered to herself, her voice a mix of determination and desperation as she turned page after page of financial statements and documents. Marcella entered quietly, bearing a tray with coffee. "Miss Laura," she said softly, her voice laced with concern, "perhaps you should take a moment to rest." Laura glanced up, her weary eyes glowing with fierce resolve. "I can't, Marcella. I must find the evidence. Javier didn't act alone. I'm convinced of it." At that moment, Carlos appeared in the doorway, his disheveled appearance starkly contrasting with the study's refined elegance. "What are you searching for?" he asked, his voice rough and strained from sleep and the remnants of a hangover. Laura met his gaze with a blend of frustration and hope. "Dad's offshore account records. Javier mentioned something about them last night," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of her words. Carlos's face lit up with a flicker of recognition. "Wait, I think I might know where they could be," he said, his voice gaining strength. With Laura and Marcella watching intently, Carlos moved to an old painting hanging on the wall. Carefully, he shifted it aside, revealing a concealed safe behind it. "The combination," he murmured, his fingers quivering slightly as he dialed the lock. "It's Mom's birthday." The safe clicked open, and inside, a stack of documents lay neatly arranged. Laura's eyes widened with anticipation as she eagerly grabbed the papers, her fingers trembling as she flipped through them with frantic energy. "Here it is," she cried out, her voice trembling with a mix of triumph and horror. "Billion-dollar transfers to Cayman Islands accounts. Look at these signatures, Javier and Dad." Carlos's face fell, his expression a picture of shock and devastation. He sank into a nearby chair, the enormity of the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. The room, once a sanctuary of order and control, now felt like a stage for unraveling truths, the weight of betrayal hanging heavily in the air. The sound of hurried footsteps echoing in the hallway pulled everyone's attention. Roberto appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of grave concern and guarded suspicion. "Marcella, we need to talk," he said, casting a wary glance at Laura and Carlos. Laura, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped forward. "Roberto, I understand your mistrust, but we're in this together now. We need your help more than ever. This situation is far beyond what we initially thought." Roberto hesitated on the threshold, his eyes scanning the room with a troubled gaze. Marcella felt a palpable sense of urgency. They were teetering on the brink of something catastrophic. The morning's shocking revelations had unraveled a deep conspiracy, one that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the Villarreal family. The atmosphere within the mansion was thick with tension, charged with the sting of betrayal and the weight of newly uncovered secrets. Marcella moved quietly through the labyrinthine hallways, her mind racing with strategies and escape plans. Despite the explosive revelations, she knew her position was tenuous, caught in a web of danger and uncertainty. As she neared Dona Teresa's room, Muffled voices drifted through the door, causing her heart to race. "Mom, you must understand," Laura's voice carried a note of desperation. "Staying here isn't safe. We need to leave." "This is my home," Donna Teresa's voice responded, laced with defiance and exhaustion. "I refuse to flee like a fugitive." Marcella pressed closer, holding her breath. Suddenly, Roberto's voice cut through, surprising Marcella with its authoritative tone. "Madam, I grasp your feelings, but the situation is critical. Javier might be released any moment now." A tense silence followed, filled only by the sound of strained breaths. Donna Teresa's voice finally broke, trembling with grief and disbelief. "How did it come to this?" With my flesh and blood unable to hold back any longer, Marcella burst into the room, her presence startling everyone. "Donna Teresa," she said, her voice firm yet compassionate, "I know it's not my place, but we must act now. We need to get you out of here." All eyes turned toward her, each face reflecting a storm of emotions. Laura gave a nod of relief and gratitude, while Roberto's gaze met Marcella's with a blend of pride and worry. Donna Teresa's expression was a mix of resignation and reluctant acceptance as the reality of their dire situation set in. As they navigated the concealed exits of the mansion, the once imposing Villa Real Estate morphed into a maze of shadows and frantic movement. The gravity of their situation seemed to echo with every step they took, their hurried footsteps amplifying the tension of their escape. Marcella's heart pounded as she guided Donna Teresa through the labyrinthine corridors, the weight of their predicament pressing heavily on her. Outside, the storm mirrored the chaos within. Torrential rain battered the windows as they reached a discreet vehicle hidden in a remote corner of the estate. With urgency and precision, they loaded Donna Teresa and crucial documents into the car. Laura cast a final, sorrowful glance at the mansion, her face a canvas of pain and determination. "We're leaving everything behind," she said resolutely, "but our priority is to ensure Mom's safety." As the vehicle sped away from the mansion, the Villarreal family, now a fractured yet united group bound by shared peril, embarked on an uncertain journey. The mansion, drenched in the storm's fury, stood silent, its grandeur overshadowed by the tumultuous storm that had engulfed their lives. In a moment of rapid decision-making, Marcella's voice trembled with resolve as she instructed, "Distract him. You all take Mrs. Teresa to a safe location before anyone can interfere." Without hesitation, Marcella sprinted towards the main street, deliberately moving away from the group's concealed position. Javier, spotting her, accelerated his vehicle, intent on intercepting her. Marcella pushed herself to the limits, her heart racing with the urgency of their situation. Every moment she bought was critical for Donna Teresa's safety and the well-being of the others. The streets transformed into a tangled web of alleyways and avenues as Marcella maneuvered through them, the roar of Javier's engine growing ever closer. Fear gripped her, but her determination to protect those who depended on her fueled her resolve. Suddenly, Marcella found herself cornered in a dead-end alley. The ominous sound of Javier's car closing in sent a chill through her veins. She turned to face the blinding headlights, bracing herself for the confrontation. Javier emerged from his car, his face a mask of furious determination. "You think you can escape from me, Marcella," he roared, his voice laced with venom. Marcella squared her shoulders, her eyes steely with defiance. "I'm not running from you, Javier. I'm protecting those who matter," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of fear churning inside her. With her back pressed against the cold wall, Marcella's mind raced frantically for an escape. Her voice quivered, but she managed to keep it steady as she confronted Javier. "What I did was right," she asserted, struggling to mask the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "Someone had to protect your mother from you." Javier's laughter was bitter and mocking. "Protect her? You're clueless. Everything I've done was for the family's benefit." In that tense moment, a noise at the entrance of the alley drew both their gazes. Carlos staggered into view, his appearance disheveled and his eyes darting between his brother and Marcela. His voice, though rough, carried an unexpected firmness. "Javier, what the hell are you doing here?" He placed himself squarely between Javier and Marcela. "It's over," Brother Carlos declared, his voice resolute. "I can't continue to be complicit in this madness." Javier's gaze was a mix of disbelief and scorn as he looked at his brother. "You, the useless junkie, think you can stop me?" Carlos's eyes hardened. "Maybe I'm an addict," he retorted, "but at least I'm not a monster trying to harm his mother." The tension in the alley was electric, crackling with the intensity of their confrontation. Marcela saw a fleeting opportunity and began inching towards the alley's exit, her movements calculated and cautious. Seeing her attempt to escape, Javier lunged at her, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Carlos, displaying an unexpected surge of bravery, threw himself at his brother, tackling him to the ground. "Run." Marcela Carlos's voice was strained but determined as he grappled with Javier. Marcela needed no further encouragement. She sprinted towards the alley's exit, the sounds of the struggle receding behind her. The world around her became a whirlwind as she raced through the streets, her heart pounding and adrenaline surging through her veins. Out of breath and disoriented, she finally emerged onto a main avenue, her body leaning against a streetlight as she gasped for air and tried to regain her composure. At that moment, a car screeched to a halt in front of her, its window rolling down to reveal Roberto's concerned face. "Marcela, thank God we found you," he exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. "Get in," quickly as Marcela slid into the passenger seat. The car sped away, leaving behind the chaos and uncertainty of the alley, and propelling her towards the safety of a future she could only hope to reclaim. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the stillness of the night. "There!" Marcela shouted, her voice cutting through the darkness as she pointed toward a nearby alley. Roberto slammed on the brakes, the car's tires screeching angrily against the asphalt. Before the vehicle had come to a complete stop, Marcela was already out of the car, sprinting toward the source of the terrifying sound. The scene that greeted her stopped her dead in her tracks. Carlos lay on the ground, his face etched with sheer terror, while Javier, clutching a gleaming knife, loomed menacingly over him, his expression twisted into a grimace of unchecked rage and madness. "Stop!" Marcela screamed, her voice reverberating off the alley's walls. Javier's head snapped around, his eyes flashing with a volatile mix of surprise and fury. "You should have been taken care of when I had the chance," he spat, advancing toward her with lethal intent. Marcela stumbled backward, her eyes desperately scanning the surroundings for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand brushed against an abandoned metal rod lying on the ground. Grasping it tightly, she raised it defensively, holding it in front of her as a makeshift shield. "It's over." "Javier," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The police are on their way." Javier's response was a maniacal laugh, echoing ominously in the confined space. "Do you think I care about the police? I've got nothing left to lose." He sneered, his grip tightening on the knife as he lunged at Marcela. She barely managed to evade the attack, the blade slicing through the air and grazing her arm. With a sharp cry of pain and a surge of adrenaline, Marcela swung the metal rod with all her might, connecting with Javier's arm. The knife clattered to the ground with a metallic clang. Roaring in fury, Javier charged at Marcela, and the two of them crashed to the ground, entangled in a frantic struggle. The commotion was suddenly pierced by the blaring sound of sirens. Police lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the alley's entrance. For a fleeting moment, Javier's attention wavered, his grip loosening. Seizing the opportunity, Marcela summoned the last of her strength to shove him off her. She scrambled toward Carlos, who lay gasping for breath, his struggle for air growing weaker. "Hold on," Marcela whispered urgently, pressing her hands over the wounds, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, signaling that help was finally arriving. The tension of the night was far from over, But for the moment, Marcela fought to keep Carlos safe and alive. B-Days, we wrap up this intense chapter of our story. We've witnessed a powerful journey through turmoil, bravery, and unyielding resolve. From the dramatic escape of the Villarreal family to the harrowing confrontation in the alley, we've seen characters pushed to their limits, fighting not just for their lives, but for their values and their loved ones. So what have you learned from this gripping narrative? Reflect on the courage shown in the face of danger, the complexity of family dynamics, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it seems all is lost. We'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments below one thing you've learned from this video and how you plan to incorporate it into your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more compelling stories and insights. Your support means the world to us.